Welcome back, everyone, to the Hey Alexa podcast, where curiosity is the currency of every conversation. Today, I'm joined by Tracey Grove, founder of Pure Symmetry Coaching and Consulting. Tracey is an executive coach, speaker, and author whose work blends psychology, neuroscience, communication, and real-world experience to help people navigate pressure, change, and growth with greater clarity and resilience. She's worked across cultures, industries, and decades, including a long corporate career before founding Pure Symmetry. And her approach is deeply grounded in one central idea: alignment between our inner world and how we show up in our lives and work. Tracey, welcome. I'm really glad to have you here.
Thank you so much, Alexa. I really am very happy to be with you.
Awesome. I'm super excited to get started. Before we get into the frameworks, the language, or the work you're known for today, I wanted to start a little earlier. You've had a long and varied career across different roles, cultures, and environments. Looking back, was there a moment early in your life or career where you realized you were especially tuned into how people think, feel, or respond under pressure?
I think there were multiple moments when
Mm.
where I realized this. A lot of my background was in tech, and as we all know, that's a very stressful, very high pressure, very high complexity environment.
Mhm.
And through my journey through tech, I constantly was having a visceral reaction to some
Mm.
of the toxic cultures that I found myself in. And I was seeing good people around me break down as a result of some of these cultures and some of these leadership styles that I was being exposed to. And I think I realized at that time that I didn't want to be a victim of this kind of toxicity any longer. I wasn't going to give my power away to
Mhm.
other people who could control how I felt and whether I even wanted to get out of bed in the morning. Um, but then also that I could potentially help others to navigate through those environments and through those situations in a way that felt true to them, obviously, so they could feel the difficult emotions that they needed to feel to work through them, but also that I could then help them to bounce back from those situations in a way that was healthy, didn't shut them down, but also allowed them to tap into the strength that they had inside them, but that maybe had been, don't know if diminished is the right word, but perhaps had
Mhm.
been a little beaten out of them
Yeah.
by the situation, and sometimes the confidence eroding that happens in those situations. So it happened multiple times throughout my career. One of the turning points for me, which was really interesting, was I remember once walking into, I actually talk about this in my book. I remember
Mhm.
once walking into a building in the organization that I was in. I had just been moved, my team had been moved into a second bigger team. So we
Mhm.
were moving offices as a result. And I remember walking in and feeling sick to my stomach for no reason. And I thought at the time, well, maybe it's the building. Maybe there's asbestos in the ceiling. This was a long time
Mm.
ago. Maybe there's, some flu bug floating around through the air ducts that's trying
No
to grab
doubt.
me. Wasn't sure what it was. And it kept happening every time I went into this building. And what I realized over time was I was having a visceral physical reaction to the
Mm.
stress on that team and the fear that that team was feeling every day coming into
Mhm.
that environment and being part of that organization who had a very toxic leader at the time. Um, and I was picking up on the energy that they were holding in that physical space. So it was a fascinating
Mm.
breakthrough for me to realize that I wanted to help people to get through that and get over that, because you can't always change that necessarily. You might be stuck with it. And then how do you survive? Not only survive it, but thrive in spite of it. And that's really, that was one of the turning points for me, was I wanted to step out in order to step in to help from the outside, to help people move through a situation like that.
Well, exactly, and the root cause, not just this Band-Aid fix of trying
Exactly.
to look objectively outward at what could be going on, like the asbestos behind the wall, so to speak, or even just
Right.
we can make those those assumptions too, but we can understand too, hey, someone's hot-headed, that affects me. But how does it
Mm,
really deeply affect me? I noticed that.
yes.
So one thing that really stands out about your work is how you often focus on what's happening beneath the surface, not
Mm,
just behavior, but patterns, assumptions, and those
hmm.
internal responses. When
Yeah.
people come to you in your practice, feeling stuck, overwhelmed, frustrated, what do you usually notice is actually going on underneath?
A lot of the time, I think that their values are being violated in some way. So there's a core belief system that somebody might
Mhm.
have, and if that isn't aligned with the organization that they're in, or the team they're in, or even the manager that they have, and that can cause this friction. And that is generally when somebody feels that discomfort. A lot of the time, it's just an, a mismatch in expectations. So somebody might have an expectation that they will be treated a certain way, or that they will be expected to behave a certain way in some
Mhm.
cultures and organizations as well. And so when that is a mismatch with who they are as a person and how they want to be treated, then often that is when you get that feeling of just it's almost a frustration, and a lot of people can't necessarily identify that that's what it is,
Yeah.
because they might just say, "Oh, this person's just grouchy, they're just difficult to work with, they're combative, they don't, we can't collaborate." But often it's because you have a fundamentally different set of expectations coming together,
Mm.
around the relationship and around what each person has the role to play in that relationship. And then it's difficult unless you actually put the elephant out on the table
Mhm.
and address it, and have a conversation around what is holding you back from having a better relationship with this person, what is holding them back from actually stepping into the middle and meeting you halfway. So those values-based conversations are so important, and we gloss over them all the time. And so
Mhm.
that's where a lot of people are struggling, is to set aside the fear of being vulnerable, because you do have to open up to a certain extent, and invite somebody to hold that space in a trustful way,
Mhm.
if you are going to ask them to work with you in a different way and to treat you in a different way. For some people, it's just not something that they're capable of, or
Mhm.
that they feel that they should. And in which case, then that's an entirely different conversation. And really, the focus should be on: is this a situation I can control?
Mhm.
Nope. But I can control my response to it. And that means I have to make a decision one way or the other. Do I stay and put up with it? Or do I move on and do something else? Or do I navigate a different relationship in a different space? So
So you
all
essentially
questions that people ask themselves. So
yes. And you essentially are diagnosing values as well and what our deal breakers might be. I think it brings out more meaning too. Like if we can really define those
mm,
things, where are we best of service? And then maybe it's not even
yes.
where we are currently. You've worked with people across cultures and industries.
Hmm.
What human patterns feel universal, no matter the context?
I think regardless of where you've come from, what culture you come from, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, whether
Hmm.
you are more data driven, whether you are, you have a linear time orientation. There are all these cultural nuances that might influence the way that you think, and the way that you manage, and the way that you do things during your day. But I think that the fundamental commonalities are the need to be part of something, to be included, the need to be accepted, and the need to be respected. And we often would talk to our clients around, who are maybe going through candidates for recruiting purposes, etc. And there's a thing called competence and fit, which are the two pieces of the puzzle really that they're looking at. And recruiters go through this a lot, where they put a lot of emphasis on competence. Somebody who can do the job, who knows their stuff, who can get things done,
Hmm.
maybe who's a real, high flyer, a power player. Fantastic. And they don't really think about the fit. does this person's values align with the person they're going to be working most closely with? Does it align with the organization's values and what
Mm.
they hope are aspiring to? So there may be a mismatch there. And then often what you get is you get a toxic employee who might be very good at what they do, but leaves bodies in their wake. So then you've got those deep human personality based behaviors that are breaking the relationships with other
Mm.
people around them. So I think those three things are really important: is just the acceptance, the respect, and just being seen and being valued as part of something, not
Mhm.
being on the outside. We value acceptance much more than we value um, you know competence, or even the approach that somebody takes.
Mhm.
We value being part of the group, which is why you get so much. You get a lot of leaders who bring in people who think like them, who see things the way
Mhm.
they do, and who've worked with them in the past and who will defer to them, etc. And then you have the danger of the groupthink and the hive mind happening, so you don't get a lot of innovative thought, that kind of thing. So there's an edge to this in both sides, but I think that
Mhm.
need for being part of the whole is probably the most fundamental human need.
100%. Do you find when someone, if they sacrifice, let's say they choose the competent person that may or may not be a mix as
Mm,
far as values go, what
mm,
slowly erodes over time? It's like they want the bottom line, they want the money, right? They're looking at
mhm.
scaling their business. They're
Yeah.
looking at this, but what are they losing that they're maybe not seeing long term there when they do something like
Mhm.
that?
Yeah, I think it depends on the business, obviously, and how much damage somebody like that can do.
Mhm.
Because for a short period of time, while this person is executing and doing well, things are wonderful, and they're
Mhm.
bringing in the money or whatever it is. But it's often at the expense of trust in the relationships with clients and stakeholders, and even with leadership. But it's also at the expense of just people don't want to work with
Mhm.
people who are like that, not long term. And so you'll find that they lose that human connection with their customers on the other side of these people who are potentially toxic. And
Mhm.
also then it just erodes their I think maybe their confidence in their ability to get things done without that person, because often people who are like that will tend to make it very clear to leadership that they are necessary and irreplaceable.
Mm.
And will make it very difficult potentially. This is the classic story of the
Mhm.
person who holds on to all the information and doesn't share, who might sabotage other people to get ahead, who steps over other people, who doesn't give credit where credit's due. If it's a leader who doesn't really let their team shine because they want all the credit. All of these
Mm.
things erode trust over time, and also then erode credibility over time for the
Mhm.
leader who's allowing this to happen and allowing these people to run their divisions in such a way. Um,
Mhm.
it You lose good people as a result of it, because there's only so long that good people will tolerate that kind of behavior,
Well,
and
it's
so
kind of like
they
a
end up
car. We forget there's
exactly
an engine, but there's wheels that have to make the car move, and there's all bunch of
right.
other parts
Right.
that
But and
we're
if
forgetting
you're not
about.
put yeah, if you don't put water in the radiator, eventually it's going to burn out, right? So
Exactly.
things like that. It's just it's got to be the sum of the parts have to be better. In this
Mhm.
one organization that I was part of, this was a perfect example of this. There was a leader who was incredibly toxic, largely because of insecurity,
Mm.
and had again, it's a story in the book, had a large organization of really competent, good people, strong people, and
Mm.
I watched these leaders in the room with this particular senior leader actively sabotage each other and
Mm.
actively go after each other and throw each other under the bus. And they did it because that's how he did business. And if they didn't do it the same way, he discredited them. And as a result, you had people who on their own or in their own teams were amazing leaders, upstanding, values-driven, hardworking, and very competent. But when they got into the leadership team environment with this other leader, they changed and they became like him. And ironically, that entire team of 300 people got laid off at once.
Wow.
And he was the only one who survived. And it's
Wow.
because he was doing a very good,
Self-preservation.
absolutely, and doing a very good job of managing up.
Yeah.
But at the expense of,
Yeah.
advocating for his team and pushing them forward. And so, and as a result, the organization as a whole lost a really good team. An entire function went away, and retained a terrible leader who's just continuing, from what I can see, to leave bodies in his wake. So it's unfortunate when that happens.
It's interesting. That sounds like the classic survival mode tactic that we
It is.
see throughout many different realms in this world.
Yeah.
Relationally, in our jobs, politically, but
Mhm.
anything to stay alive, right?
Absolutely.
And this sacrificing for the greater good kind of narrative that we hear so often. But I'm like, do we have to do that? Is there another way? Why isn't anyone
Exactly.
asking a question here?
Yeah.
That's why we're having conversations just like this. But on that note, I often notice that people who navigate life well, they're not necessarily the most skilled or accomplished, but I find they're regulated, aware, and grounded. What
Exactly.
traits or capacities do you consistently see in people who handle pressure with grace?
hmm I think there's several things. One, I would say they aren't afraid to admit that they don't know, or that they're wrong, or that they made a mistake. So they take ownership of it. The other thing is they are calm under pressure because they fundamentally believe that their actions have an impact on what's going on around them. They don't have I always talk about this in the context of locus of control. If I have an external locus of control, my boss is bad. Um, I didn't do anything wrong. I have no control over what he or she is going to say. I guess I'm just awful. I just suck. I should probably leave. If I have an internal locus of control, I know that if I have a bad review, I can distance myself from it and I can say, okay, I had an unfortunate review this time around. What caused that? What is the feedback that I received? Where maybe I didn't get something right yet, but that doesn't mean that I can't in the future, and I can improve it. I can make a difference in how I react to this. So just the way that we're wired sometimes can help that, but I think that tendency to attribute difficulties, challenges, failures, to external factors that are beyond our control is a big deciding factor on whether or not you respond to it or react to it. So, and the reality is we can all learn to respond, not react, by training our minds to think with an internal locus of control. And we do that by thinking about past successes. What have I done in the past that worked well? Shows my capability. I am capable of navigating through this. And also I'm not going to get eaten by a tiger. I'm okay. I'm
Right.
not being physically threatened by this nasty email or whatever it is that I'm dealing with, right?
Yeah, I could
So
literally just look away for a moment and let that
exactly.
emotion subside for a sec.
That's right. And my brain might be thinking that it's a tiger because it's translating everything the same way as it did when we were in caves. And I completely understand that. But the fact that I understand that allows me to say, okay, it's okay. I recognize that I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed right now. I recognize what's driving that, but I can also think about what have I learned in the past that can help me to navigate through this now, knowing that I have been able to do that in the past and I will be able to do it again. And then what action can I take, knowing what I know now, to move forward in a way that's constructive and not just reacting. So it's that it's putting that gap between the stimulus and the response. So
Mhm.
instead of just reacting to something, and so many of my clients will say, oh, I got this terrible email and I banged out a response. And I'm like, you didn't hit send, did you? And they're like, no. I'm like, okay, good.
Yeah, write
That's
that in
okay.
the draft.
Write
Then
it
get
in the
rid of
drawer,
it.
and then start again.
Well, often
So
I think if we become more of observers of our own experiences, we can really go, oh, that's so funny. Like you're triggering a part of me that has nothing to do with this
abs-
interaction. It's very interesting,
absolutely.
isn't it?
And it's fascinating how often that happens in the workplace, and we expect
Mhm.
it not to. And the irony is we're all human. Of course it's going to
I know.
happen in
How
the
can you leave it
workplace.
at the door? I can't stand that.
Exactly.
Leave it what at the door? It's my whole self.
Exactly. I remember once I was in a parking lot at the store, and a lady had parked next to me, and she was trying to carry these huge trays of bottles of bottled water, like 24 bottle trays, huge, big, bulky things. And she was trying to put them in her car. And I was trying to get into my car, but she had backed in. So she was trying to put them in on her back seat versus in the trunk. And I didn't realize this. So I had my car door open and I got in her way and I didn't realize it. And then I turned around and saw her and I said, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm in your way. And I closed the door. And she said, well, if you would move, I would be able to do this. And of course, I
Oh boy.
immediately thought, I
Yeah.
was like,
How
what are you
dare
attacking me
you?
for? How dare
Yeah.
you? So of
Yeah.
course I got in my car, um, muttered a few choice phrases under my breath, um, considered,
That's cool.
giving her the one finger salute, but thought no. And then, drove off. And I remember going into a leadership team meeting and we were talking about, you know, stimulus response. We were doing a lot of sort of deep work around how our behaviors react under stressful situations. And I told them all the story, and I was like, oh, I can't believe it. Wow, what did she attack me for? She doesn't even know me from Adam. I mean, I was trying to be polite. I was in her way, and I apologized. And the one CEO said to me, maybe she was just having a really hard day, and maybe her kid is sick, maybe her husband is not well, maybe she just got laid off, maybe
Mm.
anything could be happening in her world. You just happen to be in the crosshairs and triggered something for her, and it had nothing to do with you. And I was like, wow, I've spent the last hour driving here stewing in my own juices. I was gnashing
Mhm.
my teeth and thinking all kinds of, and then I was like, and you just literally took all of that away.
Yep.
So
Giving your
you
power
put the
away.
gap, yeah, put the
Yep.
gap between the stimulus and the response for me. Like, oh, you're absolutely right. And
Yep.
why am I allowing her to drive my behavioral reaction? Because really,
Exactly.
the only person whose blood pressure is going up here is mine.
Right?
It's not going to change
Exactly.
her behavior.
Totally. And it's interesting because I think that's how we can have a deeper perception of control over the situations that are happening around us. And why you mentioned
Absolutely.
in leaders that the ones that are calm under pressure, it's not that they're
Yeah.
not freaking out. It's that they're able to go, let's pick the, insert what could be situation here. Like this woman, she could have had the worst day of her life, but let's
Exactly.
make a generous assumption and pick the one that best serves us so that
Yes.
we aren't sent in a tizzy, because this is how this
Exactly.
energy just keeps translating, because then you get pissed off
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
and
And
then
it's kind
you
of a,
go to your
yeah,
partner or your kids,
exactly.
and so on and so
Ex-
forth. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. It's like a pay it forward exercise, except it's, in being mean. So,
exactly.
but
Um,
it's so interesting. It's just, it's so easy for us to go down the rabbit hole without even realizing that we're going down that rabbit hole. And it's
Mm.
interesting. Randy Pausch I think he was a Stanford instructor. I don't know if you've heard about him. He did
Mm.
what was called the last lecture. He
Okay.
I think he died of cancer. And he was really beloved in his university as a lecturer, and he basically gave a lecture to his class right before he left, and he said that brick walls are there for a reason. And he said the interesting thing is, in order to get over the brick wall, you have to realize that, you know, it's there to test your ability to move forward and to get over it. And the reality is that is why change is so difficult for us, because it means shifting the way we do things, and it means growing by going in a different direction. But only that way can we actually figure out what's broken and what's causing the brick wall for us. And it was really interesting, because he said you're not going to get eaten by wolves, I think was his metaphor that he used. He said, instead of going back to the way it was, because we as humans, we always want to go back to the way it was. We like consistency, we like the familiar, we like the road well traveled. Instead of doing that, instead of wanting to lose motivation to move forward and try new things, he said, think of it as a brick wall that's there for a reason, to actually challenge you to think differently, because now you have to go over it, around it, under it, whatever you have to do, sometimes straight through it. But that is often the more difficult path. It was a really, really interesting sort of metaphor for thinking
I
about
like
how you
that.
go through that kind of change.
It's interesting because if we don't take on sort of the advice that he's giving, we repeat the same pattern of crap as opposed to having more meaningful problems. Like, I could stay
Absolutely.
in this funnel of just hating everybody else because of the way the world's coming at me, if that's,
Uh-huh.
the lens you choose to see
Uh-huh.
from. But I find
Yeah.
when you can get out of that fight, flight, or freeze response,
Yes.
you can your problems don't go away, but they do become more meaningful. They give back to you. Life is
Exactly.
always trying to show you a new way, but man, we are so
Absolutely.
resistant to
Yeah,
that, aren't we?
we are, and it's because our brains are lazy.
Mhm.
They don't want to do the work. It's
I
hard.
think
It's like,
that's the truth.
energy. Oh, I have to expend energy on this. No, can I just do the way I always have? And it's kind of
Yeah,
it's funny. Einstein
predictability.
always says,
Mhm.
let's repeat the same behavior over and over, and expect a different result. Well, that is the definition of insanity.
That's correct.
So
Very,
yeah, but
very true.
it's interesting how common humans are. We're more alike than we think.
Mhm.
And we're also unique in our ability to think about thinking. And so that's what I try to get my clients to do, is to understand what's going on for them behaviorally,
Mhm.
and what's triggering these things, and hopefully help them to break that cycle. Because if it doesn't serve you any longer, well, then maybe consider something else. And some of it is
Mhm.
outside of our control, but a lot of it is within our control. Certainly
Mhm.
our responses are. And so, and a lot of that, as well as, we can shift our perception. Because if we can shift perception
Mhm.
and our perspective on something, that can change the way we see everything. But often we just have to look up to be able to do that.
100%. Connect. Connection and communication show up everywhere in families, friendships, teams, and communities. So everything we've touched on so
Yes.
far is
Yes.
very relevant to all of those avenues.
Yes.
In your work with groups and teams, what's the biggest invisible factor that either strengthens connection or quietly breaks it down?
Hmm. I think trust issues are the biggest problem, and it depends on the team. But often when a team is in pain and struggling with something, whether it be layoffs, being left behind after layoffs, there's a lot of angst around that situation.
Mhm.
Whether it be more pressure to do more with less, maybe it's budget cuts, that kind of thing. A lot of these teams are in a form of pain that no one really wants to have a conversation about.
Mhm.
And so they shrink into themselves, and there becomes a lack of trust in other people on the team's ability to hold that space. Because if I say I'm not okay, they might think I'm not okay, and
Mhm.
I'm not holding the line. I'm not doing my part. I'm not to be relied upon, or I'm just not. I'm not competent. Again, it kind of plucks that competence string for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that shrinks trust. And when teams are more open and willing to open up and talk to each other, that's when the trust is built, because then the conversation is more about, we got you, we're
Mm-hmm.
here, we get it, we know it's hard, we got it, not a problem.
Yeah.
I also struggle. So that openness, if a team's got good trust, I think that's when the connection is strong. When that fractures, and you find this happening sometimes when new team members come in because they haven't established themselves yet in the hierarchy of the team and in the team dynamic, then it's more shaky because they don't know. It's an unknown entity. Can I trust you? I don't know yet. So
Mm-hmm.
so it's a function of longevity. It's a function of how long, what has a team been through together. A lot of teams who've been through a lot of adversity together but pulled through build that
Mm-hmm.
trust muscle. But I think one of the key things is that teams have to give trust in order to get trust. So a lot of teams who are willing to have those conversations will find that once they break through that little crusty exterior, they might
Mm-hmm.
find a human being on the other side who's just as terrified as they
Mm-hmm.
are and is struggling every day just to keep up just as much as they are,
Mm-hmm.
and would really like to have someone say, "Can I help?" or "Is there anything I can do to help you out?" And
Absolutely.
will reciprocate as well.
On that note, too, then what does healthier communication actually require from us internally, not just externally?
Hmm. Well, I think one of the things is being honest with ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
as to what is my role in the situation. What have I done to help, or what have I
Mm-hmm.
done to get in the way? Um, and then articulating that, and then working for a solution that works for both parties. So that I think that's really important to continue to build trust, is being very honest with ourselves, but also with each other.
Mm-hmm.
But then also being willing to hold the space for each other. So when someone else on the team is very vulnerable, always being vulnerable, being able to hold that space without judgment. It doesn't mean that you have to be sympathetic or even agree or
Mm-hmm.
be, not be, annoyed by whatever it is. But I think just holding the space, so that
Mm-hmm.
they can be honest about what's going on, and then you can figure out together what's the best way forward is really important, I think, because it's really about that um, we're all just trying to do our best.
100%.
And I think acknowledging that is super important, and slowing down to acknowledge that, because we're all running at such a pace. I think just slowing down to have those conversations and just check in. Um, is everything okay? Especially if
Yeah.
if some behavior is slightly different, is out of the
Mm-hmm.
norm, if somebody's not delivering, or maybe they're not meeting expectations in a certain way, or they've done something that's kind of against the grain.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of reacting, jumping on them and accusing, asking what's up, because sometimes there's an underlying, again, something that's
Mm-hmm.
totally unrelated could be driving a shift in the behavior. And often just having someone say, "Oh, okay, I got you. You're not alone.
Mm-hmm.
I get it. I understand," can really help a lot. I did a lot of focus groups with one of my clients, getting feedback on their leadership team and on the culture of the organization as a whole, to help inform their HR sort of delivery.
Mm-hmm.
And after every one of them, the groups that I was in, they were intact teams, told me that it felt like therapy sessions, because what would happen is somebody would say, "I feel like I'm not competent. I feel like I can't keep up with everything. I've got so much to do, and I feel like I'm letting everybody down." And somebody else on the team would say, "You feel like that? I feel like that.
Mm.
I can't believe it. You're not," and then everyone will start to, "I get that too."
Like, why didn't we say this 2 years ago?
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
And then the next step is, "It's okay.
Mm-hmm.
We got this. How can we help? How can we make it better? Let's figure it out."
Mm-hmm.
So then you start to harness the collective wisdom of the group but
Yeah.
only if you've got that trust to hold the space for people to say, it's broken, or I'm struggling.
Yeah. I'm getting two things. When our personal job is to reflect inward, to try to understand it's very irrational to go, yet we do it anyway, from 0 to 100 right away and address the situation like that and just add a problem. Again, this goes for work, relationships.
Yeah.
It's very translatable. And then coming forward with being able to share those specific vulnerabilities. I mean, assuming you're in a place where you can genuinely hope that at least one or two people can handle hearing that and won't
Mm-hmm.
hold it against you. So if you
Yeah,
have an unsafe leader, maybe that's not the place you do that. Maybe it's your HR representative, somebody
absolutely.
else, a trusted confidant within the team.
Yep.
But the second part, more team engagement around those things.
Mm-hmm.
It's kinda like being on a date. If we're both nervous, but we both don't tell the other person we're nervous, we'll probably eat salad and it'll fall out of our mouth and we're super embarrassed, and we turn red and we go, "Oh, I coulda just said I was nervous," and then we were both like, "Oh my gosh, me too." Just
Exactly.
annihilated that kind of veil between us what
Yes.
existed,
Yeah.
and now we can see the rawness that we're both experiencing.
Exactly. And isn't it funny how the minute you say, I'm terrified out of my mind right now, another person's like, me too. You're like, oh, okay. I
Sweet,
guess
we're
we don't
going on
have to
stage
be.
together then. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, and there's more
Yeah.
solutions with that collective wisdom that you touched on.
Exactly.
I love
Exactly.
that. I love that, I love that, and, I do wanna shift too because you're still a business owner. The work you do, I think, is so relevant, and I don't know how resistant people are to having someone impose on what they think is already a great system, especially when they don't
Mm.
understand that there are other things driving us.
Yeah.
As you continue to scale your business, what do you feel like is the biggest bottleneck in terms of capacity, time, operational structure, and how people are more receptive to this? Is there a way to kind of
Mhm.
bridge the gap of both? Because you have a job of not just selling you
Mhm.
as a person and what you can
Yeah.
provide in value, but just finding the people that are interested in wanting to
Right.
do that.
Yeah. I think that's probably the biggest challenge is finding the people who are willing to have the conversation.
Mhm.
Because there is, and in certain industries, it's more um, common for them to maybe
Mhm.
be thinking about, these more, I guess you call them soft skills,
Mhm.
versus more of the technical aspects of roles. But I think so a lot of my clients just coincidentally end up being marketers, which is
Interesting.
interesting. And I think it's because they tend to have a bit more of an open perspective when it comes to um, thinking about how they think, and because it
Mm,
always comes back to communication and how they
exactly.
can, how they can influence and how they can negotiate and how they can bring others along on the journey and how they can do the storytelling. So I think the connection there is much more natural for them. But for a lot of this
Mhm.
work, it's more difficult to have those who are more in the very high tech engineering organizations, maybe even or organizations or roles that are, I guess, more male dominated, might be a little bit more
Mhm.
resistant because they're really more about fix the problem,
Yeah.
solve the problem, and have the solution, versus let's explore what we could
Mhm.
possibly do ourselves. So it's more of a consulting versus a coaching model for those organizations. So you
Mm,
have to span both, and you have to put both hats on
yeah.
in some cases, because in some instances it's okay to lead people along with solutions, fixes,
Mhm.
frameworks, tools, all of that
Mhm.
good stuff. And I think a lot of, I've noticed a lot of sort of linear left brain, very data driven people. That's what they want. They
Yep.
want you to consult and solve the problem. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Whereas the right brain creative types,
Yeah.
and sales fits into this too, are
Yeah.
really more about, let's talk about how I can solve the problem myself with you guiding. So it's a slightly
Mhm.
different nuance. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge when it comes to scaling, but also, it's one of the reasons that I do work a lot with groups and with intact teams in larger organizations, because you can scale some of these
Exactly.
skills and some of there's just awareness that people have this ability inside them. They don't. This is not rocket science. None of what I'm teaching or helping them
Mhm.
with is when and wildly unknown. But
Mhm.
what I'm trying to do is I package it in a way that is interesting, as an exploration and an
Mhm.
experimentation, because then you find people more intrigued about, oh, well, what does this mean when I'm thinking this, or when I'm reacting this way? What's going on in my brain? So that's where the neuroscience piece comes in.
Mhm.
The brain-based science is so fascinating to people across any kind of organization or any kind of role in life, and that I think they're just intrigued by it. So I think if you can get the curiosity, it can
Mhm.
help to scale the message out. Um, for instance, I would never do, something called meditation with an
Mhm.
engineering team. It would be, a focused breathing practice. It's entirely
Yeah.
different, right?
Yeah.
Because this is about efficiency. It's about, getting your brain focused, activating your frontal lobe, getting
Yeah.
that amygdala to take a back seat for 5 minutes. That's what we're
Totally.
doing here. Whereas with somebody who's more right brain and creative, it's more of a let's go into the inner world and think about, what's
Mhm.
happening, for what emotions are coming up. So I think the scaling is both finding the people who are willing to have the conversations, because a lot of this
Mhm.
is the inner work, but then it's also being able to offer something which doesn't feel woo woo to those
Exactly.
who it won't resonate very well with them.
For the more data-driven or analytical
Mhm.
minds, left-brained, if you
Uh-huh.
will, um, they, to some degree, have to understand that to make the world go round, we need a mix of both. We need
Yes.
brains that function this way, we need brains that function that way, and I think that in itself is data. So,
Mhm.
for them to wanna come to you, what do you think is something you could pose to them as a question to maybe consider?
I think the most important question is to ask, what is not working right now?
Mhm.
And how is what you've done in the past
Yeah.
working for you or not? And what might you do differently to take an approach that might bring a different result?
Mhm.
So it's really about that. What is not working, what's broken. Because if
Mhm.
it's not broken, they're not going to ask you to fix it. They're not going to look for somebody to help them navigate through it. But if there's pain somewhere in their orbit, if they're feeling friction or discomfort or pain or frustration, or something is just not working, they're coming up against a brick wall in some way. That's what I want to know. Like, is there something that is a problem? Now, how can we
I
fix
may
it in a
not be
different way?
Dr. Tracy, but I can help you diagnose the problem.
Absolutely, because they will know what the solution is.
Yes,
Everybody knows what the solution is. Sometimes they just have to, be willing to look at it in the cold
100%.
light of day.
And it doesn't take, you don't need to be data driven either to know
No,
that you have to go into uncharted, uncomfortable territory
absolutely.
to break ground and to expand in some capacity. It's just going to look a little different. Could be
Exactly.
psychologically, or it could be something more
Absolutely.
tangible on the outside.
Absolutely. And there isn't a line between them. There's one
Mhm.
doesn't, preclude the other.
Mhm.
It's all interconnected, and it's all based on how we work with each other and relate to each other as human beings, in an environment that's so volatile and so complex and
Mhm.
very uncertain.
Yep.
And it's the I think it's really about, how they can, with a guide, they can navigate through um, the challenges in a way that is less taxing on them.
Mhm.
Because if you're constantly getting over obstacles, in a way that depletes your energy, that is, it's a fight. It feels like a fight. It's really hard.
Mhm.
It's really tough. And you're beating yourself up all the time, and you're making it more difficult on everyone around you.
Yeah.
That's not a sustainable model. We don't have infinite energy. We don't have infinite motivation or willpower. These are not renewable resources. We have to be able to find more efficient, streamlined ways to get things done. And
Mhm.
that involves unpacking sometimes what's going on in our brain, so that we
Mhm.
can find a different path, because our brains like to go on the same path. We love it. It's like
Yep.
it's like a train going down the track. And the minute we stop the train and we go, oh, wait a minute, let's do something different. Let's try it. The brain's going to resist, because it's like,
Mhm.
this isn't familiar.
Yep.
This is kind of scary. I'm not sure about this.
Yep.
And that's when these leaders need to understand that that's if they can push through that in the form of an experiment. Prove
Mhm.
your hypothesis. Let's see if this works. It may or may not. It might not help. It might not be the
Mhm.
right approach. But if you don't try it, you will never know whether you've proven the hypothesis right or not. So
Mhm.
I use that experimentation idea a lot, because it
Mhm.
takes a little bit of the sting out of the tail. So people might try something and then they're like, oh, this didn't work. It was horrible. And I'm like, okay, that's data. It's not failure. It's data. You
Exactly.
tried something, it didn't work, let's try something else. Let's think
Yep.
about a different way of approaching something. So that's all it is just, allowing them to stop for a second, unpack the data, have a look at it, and use their past experience and past successes to help them to move forward, but in maybe a different way that they hadn't considered.
Mhm. I like that. Where do you see the leadership and coaching industry heading, and how are you preparing for that shift?
Gosh, it's interesting, because there's all this talk about AI,
Mhm.
and what it's going to do to every every role out there.
Okay.
And I do believe that leadership coaching, and especially leadership development, and especially around this inner work that has to happen, is going to become more and more and more important in
Mhm.
the face of AI dehumanizing a lot of
Yep.
roles. Um, and so um, I don't see coaching necessarily going away in place of AI, although I think some organizations are trying to do that. They have the chat bot, and this person can sound like you, and they
Mhm.
give people ideas and suggestions. That's all great. But it's the
Mhm.
human connection that I think is missing,
Mhm.
and will never be replaced by AI. And that's what the power of coaching is. I think if leaders understand that a coach is there not to tell
Yep.
you what to do, but to help you to find the best path, because they hold up a mirror. That's all. And it's a
Mhm.
it's a it's a walking beside somebody versus pushing from behind or dragging from the front type of
Yep.
scenario. So I think it's just going to become more and more critical. The
Mhm.
challenge, of course, will be whether it is recognized in that way,
Mhm.
because a lot of organizations see coaching and leadership development as a perk or a privilege versus a fundamental need for
Mhm.
organizations. And I would argue that it's the exact opposite. That the more uncertainty, the more layoffs, the more challenges, the more market volatility, the more pressures that leaders and organizations as a whole have um, put on them, the more important it is to get leaders who can do this work and can lead effectively. And they can only do that in a way that is profoundly human.
I like that. I like the reframe to the human first approach. And I
Mm,
think whether we like it or not, we know AI is going to be doing a myriad of different things. But I think
yeah.
it's going to push us towards connection. As much as
Mhm.
people are fearing it, I think we're going to have to double down on that more to get
Yes,
that intel. Um,
exactly.
as I do want to bring it back to the individual listening,
Mhm.
based on everything we've talked about resilience, regulation, alignment, and growth, what's one small but meaningful place someone could start looking inward this week if they wanted to show up more grounded and intentional in their life?
Mm. I think one of the ways to do this is to do a bit of a planning exercise.
Hmm.
Maybe one thing that you want to focus on in the next week. Maybe it's a task, maybe it's something that wherever you've been feeling pain or a little friction or some kind of tension, have a look at that. What is the situation? And you can use what's called the immunity to change framework, which I use all the time, which is fantastic for exploring this. So you first talk about what is the situation, what is the goal, the thing that I want to achieve. Then you look at, like, what am I doing that's keeping me in the current situation, it's keeping me in the status quo? What behavior am I exhibiting that's making this friction or this difficulty or this challenge more difficult for me? And then how could I perceive this challenge instead of a challenge or an obstacle as an opportunity? How can I shift my perspective to look at this? Maybe I'm afraid to do something, or maybe I'm worried that it's going to be more complicated than it should necessarily be. What if I looked at it differently? What if it's an opportunity maybe to have that difficult conversation with somebody? Maybe to ask a question, or maybe even just to reach across the aisle and say, I really want us to work better together. Can we have a conversation? What is the opportunity in doing that? And then look back to see, well, what is the thing that I've done in the past that could help me to do this well? What experiences have I had in my life that have helped that have helped me to overcome similar situations? And then what is the one thing that you'll do to move closer to that goal when next week comes around? What action will you take now that you've got all this data? What is the thing that you'll do? And then see. And then at the end of the week, look back. How did it go? What did you try? What was the result? I like doing that kind of exercise, and getting my clients to do that kind of exercise, especially if you've got a lot of pivotal conversations happening or that have to happen. Because a lot of this comes down to conversations with other people where there's challenge, friction, fear, discomfort of some sort. And help them see what the opportunity is in actually putting down the fear for a second and having the conversation.
No, I love that answer. That's a really good place to leave the listeners. So thank you again for sharing your perspective and your experience and the deeper layers of your work. I
You're
found
very
it
welcome.
very, I have found it uplifting and very insightful. So for anyone listening who wants to learn more about you and your coaching and your workshops or speaking opportunities and how you can work with Tracey, I will make sure to provide all the links in the show notes. So thanks again
Thank
for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Alexa. I appreciate it too.